Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Thank you for joining the Empowerment Zone. I am your host, Ramona Houston. Today we have Dr. Dhanfu Elston, who I am excited to have. He's the first fellow alum of Clark Atlanta University that I have on the show. Hi, Dr. Dhanfu. How are you today?
Hello there. Hello there, Dr. Houston. Dr. Ramona, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to have Dr. Elston here because he is an educator. And as our audience knows, there are very few African-American men in education. And that's one of the things we need to promote in our community is to have more African-American male educators. But right now, Dr. Dhanfu has had a long history in higher education, working for various institutions as well as nonprofits. And currently, he is with Complete College America. He serves as Chief of Staff and Senior Vice President for Strategy, where he utilizes his national policy and campus expertise for practical application, implementation, and scaling of Complete College America strategies at institutions throughout the United States. He works a lot with historically Black colleges and universities, as well as minority serving institutions and all types of institutions throughout the United States. So Complete College America, which in our conversation we may refer to as CCA, really does work to help close the educational achievement gap. But I'm going to let Dr. Dhanfu take it from here. And Dr. Dhanfu, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do and how you got into education. Tell us a little bit about your personal and professional trajectory, and then you can go on and talk about your work at Complete College America.
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Dhanfu Elston, and I am originally from Compton, California, but I'm a Southern boy at heart. My family is from Mississippi, and ended up becoming transplants on the West Coast. And I think that that experience of having a family that grew up in the South, where education has always been the path for liberation for people of color. And then, being an individual who grew up in Southern California, where, the environment is extremely representative of not only where the country is, but where the country will be. My neighborhood in Long Beach and Compton, California was, not just Black folks, but it was, there were individuals of Mexican descent, Latinx populations. It was nothing odd or out of the ordinary for Latino culture, Mexican culture in particular, to be a part of what our community experienced. I remember my next door neighbors having, her quinceañera, and just realizing that, we were all culturally trying to become better individuals and trying to uplift our communities and finding education as a pathway to make that happen. I, like so many students who, came from I would say a working class family, really knew I had to do something. I had to find a way to make my path. My mom and daddy said, "We love you, but you're not going to be here in this house," well past high school. And so I had to make some decisions, and my family was always supportive of education, but I really didn't know what that would look like for me. So I did a stint at a community college for a little while I was in high school, just kind of taking some classes. Ultimately enrolled in a large research institution in Southern California. where I felt absolutely overwhelmed. It was just, one of the few brown faces in an audience, overwhelmingly white students. And at that point, I decided to make a decision, and I transferred to Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. And as you well know, a small liberal arts, historically Black college. And it was the best decision I could have ever made in my life, because what I learned was that college is not just a place to go to survive, it's a place that you can go and thrive. And attending, that institution, CAU is where I got my start in higher education. At that point, even though my degree ended up being completed in biology, I knew that I had a passion for working with students that look like me. And most importantly, how do you change the structures for individuals that may not quite know how to do college? We talk a lot about, nationally about achievement gaps, but I always feel like every student can learn, every student can be successful. I don't even use that terminology, achievement gaps. The issue really are institutional performance gaps. There's lack of structure, that is catered toward the populations that we need to see succeed. And so after Clark Atlanta University, I got involved in student activities. Ended up starting my career in student affairs, enrollment management. Ended up working after leaving Clark Atlanta for a number of years, ended up working at Georgia State University, where I led student success and retention. Georgia State University now is the national exemplar for closing of equity gaps for Black and Latino students. And so that, to me, was really showing me that this is the direction of where we need to go in higher education. And now I have the privilege of working for a national advocacy organization in Complete College America, where our goal is to focus on structures, and not just in a specific institution, but at systems and at states. We're going to figure out how do we take these high impact practices and scale them in a way that's going to assist many more students. So we work nationally on structural reforms that promote policies to improve student success. And that work is daunting, but exciting, because we've been so focused on just access to higher education and not what happens once the students get there. And very few Black and brown students were finishing. And so that's the work that's in front of us.
So tell us a little bit more about specifically what you do at Complete College America to change structures. Like what, tell the audience more about your specific work.
Sure. When you think about, how do you get individuals, how do you get a movement to happen? There's a lot of behavioral research around, how do you create, momentum? And for us, what we realized when we started in 2009, so we're almost 11 years old, was that the whole entire field had strictly been focused on access and not on that complete agenda. And so for us, one of the things that we felt was an important starting point was to get states and governors to commit to a college completion agenda. And so what we thought we would do, our founding president said, if we could get, 10 or 15 governors to commit to a college completion agenda, we'll be successful. Right now, we're 38 of the states in the United States, as well as a number of institutional consortia in the states that are not part of our larger alliance. And so, for us, the first step was to kind of build an alliance and a coalition of the willing that wanted to do the work. And part of that work included changing policy and thinking about what are the hurdles and what are the things that are causing problems financially, kind of funding models are being used to support institutions. And then we've kind of, evolved from that early advocacy and policy work into creating those conditions for change. So after you start to share the data and the things that had not been shared publicly around the significance of the problems, then individuals start saying, okay, so what do we do about it? And so we then moved into a number of strategies And for many years, we called them the game changer strategy because we wanted to focus in on what are the 4 or 5 things that an institution can do to solve some of the biggest issues of student success and retention. And so now we help a lot of institutions implement those strategies. Our larger goal in all of this is the promotion of social and economic mobility through higher education. And we know that college completion is a step in that path.
Mm-hmm. Can you explore or tell our audience a little bit more about your game changer strategies?
Sure, I'm happy to. And now is actually a very interesting time period because when we first started off, game changer strategies were focused on a couple of key areas. They were things around like developmental education and the utilization of co-requisite support. So realizing that a lot of students got placed in developmental education because they might have missed a cut score by 1 point. And what we know is that the difference between a 1 point on a test could be whether or not you had a good breakfast that morning. So showing individuals that, standardized testing was not the best way of assessing students' ability. That's some of the work that we've done. Did a big national campaign around 15 to finish. And so helping students and their families realize that time is the enemy. Even though you might have a complex life, trying to stay as close to on time as possible will save you time and a whole lot of money and loan debt over time. We were kind of the driving force behind this guided pathways movement. Just realizing that too frequently students were just being asked to come to campus and figure it out versus very clear, discrete steps, of this is what class you take. This is what will help you make good decisions. This is what strong, proactive academic advising looks like. Math pathways, realizing that a lot of students, their biggest hiccup, and a lot of individuals in the country have a phobia around math. And although you can have a phobia around math, everyone has the potential to do well in mathematics with the right pedagogy. But we also realize that for some individuals in different majors that are not STEM majors, college algebra may not be the best math. Statistics might be better for business or quantitative reasoning. So just trying to focus on some of those key structures that were in place. We talked a lot about something in the past that is new again in this COVID environment, to structured schedules. Individuals who are adult learners, those individuals who are managing their families and their work environment, the last thing they want to do is have to literally negotiate with their employer every single semester on what their schedule is going to be. And so if they have some level of predictability and say, okay, I can take an afternoon block or a morning block, this gives me some clarity around what I'm doing in school and in work. And so all those strategies we've seen to have some amazing results across the country. They're not the only strategies that exist, but there are a couple that are really more structured nature, and they have components underneath them, but those are the broad kind of buckets of things that we've been focusing on.
So talk a little bit about your results. You just said you're seeing results. What has been the impact of these game changer strategies on higher education throughout the U.S.?
Yeah, as an advocacy organization, the main thing that we're trying to do is get good ideas out into the higher education ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And so, if you go on Twitter and type in, the 15 to finish, 1-5 to finish, you'll literally see hundreds of institutions that now have a campaign around on-time completion. Mm-hmm. For us, that is the metric of success. Of course, the goal is, are you seeing down the line, are you seeing higher rates of completion? And we are starting to see that. We've been trending upwards as a country. The problem is gaps still remain for Black and Latinx students. And so even though we've made some progress, and that line is moving upwards, there's still a huge gap, between our most minoritized student populations. And so to me, that's the game and the work. And those are just a couple of examples, but, co-requisite support is now, pretty much the standard. We have a number of states moving in this direction and thinking differently around placement testing. And so even in this COVID environment and this focus on racial justice, as a result of, the George Floyd, kind of an experience and phenomenon, colleges started saying, well, maybe we need to think differently about our testing strategies and how we onboard students and how we make sure that they have a true equitable experience in higher education. And so many of the strategies we've been kind of pounding the pavement about, many institutions are now saying, okay, that is probably the best approach moving forward. So the data is positive, but issues around excess credit, gateway course completion, credit accumulation, which is huge. And, students on average, graduating with way more credit hours than they need. All those things have financial implications for families. And those are some of the problems we're trying to solve.
And that's good that you're looking at it in the perspective for what is in the best interest for the students. You get in college, you end up taking courses that you don't need, you end up wasting time and wasting money. And so, and in addition to that, so many people accumulate a lot of debt and then don't even finish. And so the process is, how do you become more efficient and effective in your matriculation process? I know it must be fulfilling for Complete College America to see, all of these institutions incorporating many of the strategies that you all have, despite whether you all get credit for it or not, but that they're actually, using your strategies. So as an educator, I do want to talk about the different types of institutions and what has Complete College America seen in terms of the work that needs to be done. We have our historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. We have our Hispanic serving institutions, HSIs. We have MSIs, minority serving institutions. We have the predominantly white institutions. And then, we have the large public, the small private. What have you seen as the difference among all these various types of institutions that exist in terms of their work in in their work in progressing or helping students to progress through the process?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question, because I think every single one of those institutional types has a different focus, a different mission, a different historical context. And so when I think about, the fastest growing population of Latinx students, the federal designation around what is considered a Hispanic serving institution might be, is based on a number, is based on a percentage. And so that percentage will change. And so that's why you see a large growth of institutions receiving that Hispanic serving institution designation. The challenge in that is that the numbers are not necessarily an indicator of how focused those institutions are on serving that particular population.
That's so true.
And so you've got institutions that might have been predominantly white institutions that now have Hispanic serving institution designations, but are not necessarily serving Latinx students well. And so you've got that part of it. And then you've got, HBCUs and a number of predominantly Black institutions where their mission, 150 plus years ago was always to serve, this particular population. And so people enter into that space with a different mindset and a different expectation of what should happen. So with all that being said, I think that, all of these institutions, the biggest challenge that I see broadly in this 10 years or so, the college completion movement. And I'm going to say there are a lot of institutions that have been focused on college completion, but I would say the country as a whole, this larger movement has really only been the past decade. The institutions that were the early adopters are probably the institutions that would have done well anyway. Mm-hmm. And so what I find is that, there are still a number of Hispanic serving institutions, a number of HBCUs where when we sit down and talk to them or involve them in a project, they are still at the very early stages of implementing some of these strategies that a number of institutions have been doing for the past 10 years. And so that, I think, is extremely important because a lot of the institutions that serve the most vulnerable students have been left behind in this movement. And so that's where our focus has been.
So if you look at that, now the question becomes, is that, if you want to discuss it, is that leadership? Is that a lack of resources? Is that a lack of will? How would you answer or address or analyze the reason why some of these institutions aren't moving forward to incorporate many of these strategies?
All of the above. Okay. is my answer. I think that, but I'll start off with some of the issues that I think are most critical with regard to resources. A number of institutions, not being, receive equitable funding, from their peers. And I'm talking about community colleges, technical schools, because we're not just talking at Complete College America. When people say college, they think 4-year degree. We're talking about associate's degrees, mm-hmm. degrees of purpose and value. So It could be a certificate program. It could be anything. So I think that is one of the challenges that's in front of us is resources. Even in our advocacy of outcomes-based funding, what we realize is that a number of states that establish outcomes-based funding, they still, establish models that disenfranchise the institutions that serve most of the Black and brown students. And so trying to help them understand that if you want to create an equitable performance funding model, you should really incentivize those institutions that are serving the students that you need most. And so I would say that finance and resources are part of it. I would say that to some degree, it is the healthy skepticism that takes place at HBCUs and HSIs around outsiders coming in and saying, this is what you should do. Here's the best policy for you. And I think that's also an important part of the conversation. I think that, we need to make sure that we hire and bring in more organizations that understand the cultural nuance of those campuses. What does it mean for those families? Having individuals and technical assistance providers who look like those campuses, and so all of those things are important parts of that work.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is there any other things you want to talk about in terms or share about your work with Complete College America?
I think, one of the things that we are in the midst of right now, especially, I think we just would be remiss if we didn't mention this unique moment that we're in higher education. Not just the COVID environment that will have ripple effects for many, many years, but also the focus on racial justice. I think when you think about why people go to college, it's to learn, it's to grow, it's to develop. But for a lot of folks, it's also to get a job. Mm-hmm. And when we start now thinking about economic recovery and that there have been so many Black and Latinx students that have already been on the margins of higher education, now more than ever, we're going to have to double down on those strategies that are going to help them be successful. African Americans, Latinx students, tend to be underrepresented in the fastest growing and highest paying occupations. Mm-hmm. And higher education is a way that can solve that. But we've got to be laser focused on those students that have been left behind in this college completion movement. And I think that is going to have to be something that institutions address, or they're going to cease to exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true. So true. We have a lot of work to do in higher education and making sure that all people have the right to pursue an education and complete an education, and specifically dealing with the whole racial and social justice era and movement, that we have a lot of work to do there to make some structural changes so that, we have institutions that actually serve the needs of all of America. So with that being said, what would you want our audience to do to advance the work of Complete College America and advance the work of higher education? All of us have a role and responsibility to serve our communities. So what call to action would you give our audience?
Well, I think the first, recommendation I would make to your audience, but also the families of the students who will be considering college, is to acknowledge and continue to share that the value proposition of college is still absolutely critical. I think there's a lot of discussion around, is it worth the money? Is it worth the time? Is it worth the investment? And the answer to that very simply is yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. I think as we watch what happened with essential workers in the middle of this COVID environment, they are the first individuals to lose their jobs. And so being able to have levels of financial support, professional support that allow you to withstand some of the economic headwinds, college is the best route to ensure that happens. At the same time, I think that institutions, the structures, as mentioned, are critical. We have to hold higher education institutions' feet to the fire. We have to continue to not just say, oh, congratulations, my baby made it to college. No, we got to ask questions. What kind of support do you have? You know what I'm saying? What happens if a student needs some extra tutoring? What are your graduation rates? What are your graduation rates for students that look like me? You know what I'm saying? And not graduation rates within 8 years. I want to know what the on-time graduation rate is, because I plan to come back in 4 years and sit in an auditorium at a graduation. I'm not talking about 8 years from now. And so I think those kind of questions, the more we continue to ask them, the more institutions realize that communities, Black and brown communities, are making decisions with their feet, and we have choices, and we need to have a level of expectation that our students will not just get to college, but they'll ultimately complete.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhanfu. If people want to get in touch with Complete College America, could you share your website with them, or if they want to get in touch with you?
Sure, be happy to. So you can go to Complete College, 2 words together, .org. And, it talks a lot about our strategies. Anyone can sign up for a profile and just kind of be up to speed on different articles or different initiatives that are, in the process or that are being rolled out as far as some of the new innovation. Personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, Dhanfu, DHANFU, Elston, ELSTON, and on Twitter, I'm at Dr. Elston, DRELSTON on Twitter.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanfu. It's great to have you, and thank you for telling us all about your great work at Complete College America and making sure that our communities see the value in higher education.
Well, thank you for the work you continue to do, and it's a pleasure to be here. Hello.
I'm here with Dr. Dhanfu Elston, and he is here to give us his strategy for college success. Hi, Dr. Dhanfu.
Hello there, Ramona Houston. How are you today?
Fine. So tell us, where did you attend college? What were your degrees? And what is that strategy that you would give students to ensure that they succeed in college?
Sure. I had the pleasure of being a graduate of Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, where I received a bachelor's in biology and a master's degree in educational leadership. I went on to receive my doctorate, my terminal degree from Georgia State University in educational policy studies. And the piece of advice that I would share with students pursuing higher education is that I think that two different things kind of roped into one. The big one is that time is the enemy. And if you are going to go to college, you've got to focus and you've got to try to get through as quickly as possible to ensure that you save time, save money, reduce your loan debt, and are able to quickly get into that job or that career or that graduate, school that is the next stage and phase for you. While you're in that process, you've got to consider this a sense of purpose. You got to understand what this is all about and what it means, not only to you, but to your ancestors and your families and your communities and those individuals that have done amazing work and have included prayers and support and best wishes to get you over that finish line. And that purpose may be, a job that pays a decent salary, but that sense of purpose may be a career that allows you to give back to your community and to be a level of support to a community that has been underrepresented. And so do what feeds you, what keeps you focused, what instills a sense of passion, and do it with some speed.
Well, thank you so much for that advice. Stay focused on your mission and stay focused on your purpose. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhanfu. We appreciate that great advice.
Thank you, Dr. Ramona.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.